So something huge just happened on the world stage. On September 21st, 2025, a coordinated decision by three of America's tightest allies, this sent absolute shockwaves through global diplomacy. We're talking about a major diplomatic break here. So let's get right into it. What exactly happened? What was the trigger? And what's the fallout from this massive decision?
All right, first up, let's break down the main event itself. This was a really big, coordinated announcement from three major Western powers.
So, on September 21st, 2025, boom, the UK, Canada, and Australia all at the same time announced they were formally recognizing the State of Palestine. And the timing here is key, right? It was just before the UN General Assembly. This was a huge break from their old policy. For decades, the line was always recognition only comes after a peace deal is signed. Well, not anymore.
So you gotta ask, why now? Well, the leaders laid out a few key reasons. They wanted to inject some new momentum into the whole two-state solution idea. They pointed to the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the rapid expansion of Israeli settlements. Basically, they felt the chance for a negotiated peace was just slipping away, being steadily and gravely eroded. The key takeaway here is how they framed it. This wasn't meant as a slap on the wrist for Israel. It was, in their view, a desperate move to keep the dream of peace from dying completely.
You can hear it right here in this quote from UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He says, "To revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution, the United Kingdom formally recognizes the State of Palestine." So the goal they're putting out there is to create a new runway for peace talks. But as you can imagine, that's not exactly how it was seen in Jerusalem.
Yeah, not at all. Israel's reaction was swift, it was angry, and there was absolutely no room for interpretation.
Listen to this from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. "You are rewarding terror with an enormous prize. It's not going to happen. There will be no Palestinian state." It's pretty blunt. He framed this whole thing as just giving in to terrorism, basically saying it was a reward for the October 7th attacks and that it puts Israel's entire existence at risk.
And this right here, this is the heart of the whole issue. You have two completely different worlds looking at the exact same event. The nations doing the recognizing, they see it as a necessary step for peace. Israel's view, it's an absurd prize for terrorism that makes peace harder to get. It's like they're speaking two different languages. One side's solution is the other side's poison pill.
And we're talking about more than just angry words here. Israeli officials are floating some pretty serious punitive measures. Things like authorizing thousands of new homes in West Bank settlements, withholding tax money from the Palestinian Authority, and maybe even formally annexing parts of the West Bank. Netanyahu himself said a formal response is coming after he visits the US, so the message is basically, watch this space.
Okay, so what about the Palestinian reaction?
Well, it wasn't simple either. It actually revealed a really interesting split between the official leadership and what people on the street were feeling.
You can see this tension perfectly right here. On one hand, you have the Palestinian Authority calling it a courageous and historic decision, a huge win. But then you talk to people in the West Bank, and the welcome is wary. You hear things like, recognition by itself is not enough. Will it change anything on the ground? And that's the core of it, right? For the leadership, it's a massive diplomatic victory. For people living with the daily grind of the occupation, there's this deep skepticism about whether a symbolic act can really change their lives.
And here's the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, calling it a victory for right over wrong, for justice over occupation. For the official leadership, this is huge. It basically validates their entire strategy, which has been to pursue statehood through international diplomacy and legitimacy, not through armed conflict.
But, this whole thing isn't just about Israelis and Palestinians. The ripples are spreading out and deepening some major cracks on the global stage. We're talking about a real split between the US and some of its closest friends.
The US is standing firm with Israel here. The Trump administration is not on board at all, and they're warning their allies that this could lead to punitive measures. Think about that. This creates a massive diplomatic rift with three members of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance, the UK, Canada, and Australia. That is a very, very big deal.
And let's look at the bigger picture for a second. With this move, we're now at over 150 UN member states that recognize the State of Palestine. So while this feels like a radical step for these three Western countries, what it actually does is bring them in line with what most of the world already thinks. It's the US-Israeli position that's looking more and more isolated.
The geopolitical consequences here are huge.
You've got strains on that Five Eyes alliance we just talked about. You've got the Abraham Accords, those deals that normalize relations between Israel and some Arab states. They could be at risk of collapsing. And now there's way more pressure on other European countries like France and Portugal to do the same thing. For instance, if Israel retaliates with annexation, that could be a total deal-breaker for the Arab nations who just made peace.
So all of this brings us back to the biggest question of all. After this diplomatic earthquake, what happens to the chances for peace?
Is this the path to peace or to deeper division? You know, is this the shock to the system that was needed to restart a peace process that's been dead in the water for years? Or is it just going to make everyone retreat to their corners and dig their heels in even deeper?
Well, the next few weeks are going to be critical. This week, Netanyahu is addressing the UN and meeting with the U.S. president. All eyes will be on that. In the coming weeks, we're expecting Israel to announce its official response. And you can bet the UN General Assembly is about to become the main stage for this whole debate. We're really at a fork in the road, and these next steps will decide which path we go down.
And really, that brings us to the fundamental question at the heart of all this. Can a symbolic act actually change the reality on the ground? For millions of people, all this high-level diplomacy can feel a world away from their daily lives. The hope, of course, is that this is the first domino to fall, leading to a real, tangible change. But for now, that's a question without an answer.